Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Disney Antiquities and Collectibles. I am one of your co-hosts, Vince G, along with my amazing co-host, Matt McKim. Matty, how you doing?
I'm doing fine. Ready for this podcast.
Ready for the podcast.
Yeah,
you know,
with an old friend.
It's funny because when I Jeff Kurtti was one of the first people that I was like so hoping to talk to. With all his books and everything. And then you said you're
Very
friends with him.
knowledgeable. Yeah.
Yeah.
We
And
go
I'm
back
like,
to the late 80s, actually.
yeah. Wait, say that again. The late what?
The late 80s. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
We're not going to tell our age.
No, definitely no. We're all under 30 here, right?
Absolutely. We feel it at least.
Yeah.
And sometimes we act like it.
Yeah. He is one of these people that historian, author, just producer, director.
A wealth of information.
And
beyond Disney, too.
And yeah.
Surprisingly, beyond Disney. I always think of him as Disney historian, but there is so much more facets to this man than you can imagine.
Yeah. Pop culture, the icon. So, but
Hollywood.
Anyways, yeah. Well, yeah. Without further ado, let's bring on the incomparable Jeff Kurtti. Jeff,
hello,
good afternoon.
Jeff. Good afternoon. I'm delighted to be here as an antiquity, I guess.
No, you speak of antiquities.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yes, you are not an antiquity yourself.
Oh.
You've got another 40 years to go for that.
Oh, God, I hope so.
With a lot more books and presentations to go.
Yes.
I hope so.
Yes.
You're originally from Seattle. What got you started into Disney? What made you go there? What attracted you?
I don't know what the range of your audience is and how deeply what the age range or what their interests are, but because it's hard to contextualize for people what kind of Disney used to be versus the sort of mega international corporation intellectual property generating thing that it is now.
Yeah.
But I grew up in Seattle. I got taken to the Mount Baker Theater in Bellingham, Washington when I was about 5 years old to see Mary Poppins.
Oh,
there you go.
And I was told that, number one, it was the first time I'd ever sat quietly for 2 hours and 20 minutes at a stretch. And the legend that my mother told later was that I looked at her afterward and said, "Can we see that again?"
Wow.
So it did something to my brain, and I became very interested in Mary Poppins. And then my grandmother said, "Well, Walt Disney, you know who Walt Disney is?" And of course, I was a kid. Walt Disney was Betty Crocker. Walt Disney was, a name. And she said, "Well, he made Mickey Mouse." Well, I was a Mickey guy from infancy, so that was pretty amazing. So she explained to me kind of who Walt Disney was. And that started the whole ball rolling. I got, it was the old days, so I got comic books and storybooks and the records. Oh my God, the Disneyland records. And so I just was a consumer of that stuff. And I just watched the TV show every Sunday night. And it became a part of my personal culture. So I wanted to make it a part of who I was, who I am.
Yeah.
So, of course, in those days, it was you had, you want to work at Disney, you should be an artist, right? Yeah. So I went to art school, and that lasted long enough for me to realize that I really wasn't very good. I could imagine wonderful things, and later on projects and art directing and things, I had an understanding. I had a base knowledge. I knew how things were done. I knew all of the references and background in terms of the creation of the art. It wouldn't come out here.
Yeah.
It wouldn't come out the ends of my fingers. So I sort of shifted gears, and I started focusing on things that I did know how to do. And, it's a long, long story. I kept applying at Disney and getting rejected because, of course, even a mailroom job back in the 80s was, you had to have a college degree.
Yeah.
And I had not one of those.
Okay.
So I wound up working for theater chains, and it's, once again, the connections of life. One of my best friends in Seattle, I worked with in an art department for a movie theater chain. Skip ahead 100 years. He's the Academy Award-winning production designer of Mary Poppins Returns and Chicago and all that stuff, John Meyer. He and I were friends in Seattle. I moved to LA because I got offered a job in the LA office of this theater company. And number two, John was going out on a movie location and his apartment would be empty for like 3 months. So that confluence happened. And I kept banging on the door at Disney and trying to do something there. And I mean, it's something that I encourage young people all the time. If you have a place that you feel like you want to go work, whether it's, the Academy Museum or, Disney or heck, Ralph's, go there and get any job. Be there, be inside, because you're going to be able to navigate it a lot better. I have a lot of young friends who, they want that labor grade and that specific job. And I say, being in is better than any of that.
Sure. Learn how it works.
Yeah.
That was where I wound up. I wound up, again, side doors and confluences of personalities and people. And I wound up working on the 1984 Olympic Arts Festival, which was a huge thing in LA back then. And I mean, it was never before, never again will I work on anything that gigantic or important or culturally influential. Then, of course, Michael and Frank came into Disney at about the same time, in time of the Olympics. Suddenly, after the Arts Festival was over, they were hiring people at Disney, and they didn't care if you had a degree. So a lot of people went over from the Olympics. Peter Schneider went over and worked with Roy, trying to get animation on its feet. Tom Schumacher, who had been on the Arts Festival with Tom, came over with Peter a little while later and started producing animated films and became the head of the animation studio after a while. Even down to the head of security they hired at the studio was the guy who had been the head of security at the Marina Del Rey office of the Olympics, So
I never heard that.
And a whole bunch of people migrated from the Olympics to Disney, except me.
Well, I'm sorry, Jeff, I was reading a few bits on you here, and so it was mentioned between the Olympics and then Cal Arts under the president.
The head of the Olympic Arts Festival. The head of the Olympic Arts Festival, the creative director, was Bob Fitzpatrick, who was then president of Cal Arts.
Yes. Yeah.
So he called me, said, I have a personal assistant job. It is a terrible job. He was right up front. He said, it's a life-sucking job, but if you leverage it right, there's a lot you can learn. There's a lot you can experience. And he made no bones about the fact that he was impossible to work for. And, but heck, I was in my early 20s. Well, why not? And I went. And of course, Cal Arts had that great connection to what was that guy's name?
WD. Yes.
Walt something.
Walter Lance, somebody like that. Anyway, so I wound up there for about 2 years. Then, miracle of miracles, Fitzpatrick got tapped by Michael and Frank.
Yes.
Because he was a Francophile and he had been decorated with the Arts and Letters Award by the French government like twice.
Yeah.
And had done all this big artsy culturally thing. And going into France with Disneyland Paris, or Euro Disney, as we knew it back then, right, Matt? They wanted somebody who had some cultural gravitas so that the French would not embrace Jim Cora. God bless Jim Cora.
Yes. Yes.
The book you wrote with Jim. Yeah.
Oh, God. Jim's the guy who finally walked up to Fitzpatrick and said, are you going to hire this guy on our project or do I have to steal him? And Bob did not want me to not drive his car and, wake him up in the morning and hand him his newspaper and stuff. So Jim Cora hired me out of Cal Arts and put me in at Disneyland International on the Disneyland Paris project.
So it was actually Jim Cora then,
It
not
was Jim.
Fitzpatrick.
No.
Interesting.
It was
I
Jim.
was thinking there was a connection with Fitzpatrick.
Yeah.
Because as you didn't mention, Fitzpatrick actually became the president of Euro
president
Disneyland
of Euro Disney. Yeah.
in the beginning.
Michael and Frank brought him in because they wanted they felt he brought a lot of, like I said, cultural gravitas that the French would appreciate above, Jim being an incredibly skilled Disney guy.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
It didn't mean much to them, for instance, as it does to us, that Jim was sort of placed on his career path by Walt.
Yes.
That didn't matter in a public perspective to them.
Correct.
So anyway, that's how I got into Disney. I worked with Disneyland International for several months, and then I moved over where I met Matt. I was on the Euro Disney Imagineering team, and I was the graphic department coordinator. And Matt, I think you were in the model shop.
I was
at that time.
I was doing models both for architectural and rock work because of my sculpting background. I was doing rock work. Yeah. So that's many times.
That's where Matt and I met. And I was telling Vince earlier, I have vivid memory of little co-conspirator, you and me, going to, you had managed to ace a behind the scenes tour of Splash Mountain. I think it was related to a rock work thing.
Okay.
So you and I drove to Anaheim, and it began to pour on our way there.
That I forgot.
And we walked through Splash Mountain under construction in the pouring rain. And we both squeegeed into your car and came back to Imagineering. I got in all kinds of trouble by Greg Paul because I was gone for like 5 hours. So,
That's funny.
Yeah.
And Greg became one of my bosses too much later.
Yes. Well, Greg, I mean, God, what a Greg, and that's the thing, Matt. I mean, you come at it from lineage a lot in terms of your Disney stuff. These people and this work was kind of part of your personal culture already. But I think you appreciate as much as I do that there were great people like Greg Paul, who is kind of legendary in the Disney graphic design, park graphics field. And then all the people we worked with, from Herbie to Frank Armitage to Claude and
it is amazing when you think about it.
Oh gosh, who was that giant guy in the model shop? What was his name?
Jack Fergus.
Jack Fergus, who had hands they were as big as a waffle iron. And Jack Fergus would make these incredibly delicate little teeny dimensional things. And, we could go up and down the hallways and talk to John Hench or talk to Claude. Loved young people and loved to share his ideas, share his perspective, his advice. And, we had that
very giving man
all over. And not to mention Marty. I mean, of course,
yes.
Marty sat there at the top of the food chain, but he was the reason I have the career I have to a large degree is because of Marty. Wow. And, that all happened there.
Yes.
I moved over from Disneyland Paris into communications. Mm-hmm. And we had a communications manager at the time named Betsy Richmond, who is a glorious human being.
Yes.
And Betsy also encouraged Betsy was the one who gave me key advice about, being a Disney nerd. She would say, nobody likes a policeman unless they're helping them cross the street. Because she was cautioning me from just going in and laying down the law. You can't do that. You've got the nomenclature wrong. That's a trademark,
Yeah.
Be the good cop and put your arm around people and say, let me help you cross the street. Little life lessons like that I got all the time. And Marty's the one, or Betsy kind of kept putting my work in front of Marty. I still remember Marty sent back something I had written And you know this feeling, Matt. Red flare pen all over it. Red. And I was sitting there looking really dejected, and Betsy came in and said, "Oh, he likes you." And I held this thing up that looked like somebody had opened a vein on it. There was so much red ink. And she said, "Do you think he would spend that amount of time
Hmm.
if he didn't see value in what you were putting in front of him?" He's trying to guide you. He's trying to
Yeah.
show you how this works.
Yeah.
That's great.
So once again, those are kind of those things. And from Imagineering, I went over to a role in corporate. Michael had a really great, Eisner had a great department called Corporate Synergy and Special Projects. And it was before the word synergy got turned into a joke word.
Yeah.
But Disney, of all companies, used to very much thrive on curated synergy. And Michael didn't really understand how it worked per se, but he knew it was really important. And so he set up a department, and it was, at the time I moved over there, it was Linda Warren, and then it was Jody Dreyer after Linda went to Florida. And it was me and Lorraine Santoli and Fiona Cherbach, who was the kind of the office coordinator. So it was just us, but it was a really cool job that had to do with sort of culture and legacy issues within the company and guiding people to, everything from having an informed understanding of how to use properties, characters, marks, strategizing across the business unit so that everybody was sort of speaking with the same voice, especially as it related to events. I remember the big one. There's a huge initiative behind Dick Tracy in 1990.
Oh, yeah.
And so our department worked with studios on publicity and Howard Green and, a whole bunch of people to strategize that stuff kind of across all departments. The other thing it did was, and this was the great thing about this balance of the corporate synergy, was, you had little guys in terms of business units. You have the big gorilla business units like, pictures distribution or home video, but you have little business units. And in many cases, like back then, even Walt Disney Records was kind of a little business. I mean,
Yeah.
but, they had good product. They had consistently good sales. They just were not a mega business like studios, but you could help elevate what they were doing by latching the train cars together and making everybody move as one. So it was a really interesting
Yeah. Perfect job for you.
place to be. It was a really good place to be. I have said many times over the last few years that Disney would really benefit by putting that mechanism back in, because I think right now Disney suffers mostly from an overall lack of curation.
Yeah.
We're not, Disney is not introducing people to legacy and culture issues in an organized way. And they're kind of leaving self-curation up to individuals. And some people can do it and some people aren't good at it. And I just feel like as a company, it's a responsibility it's like Roy re-releasing classic movies every 7 years. You sort of, it's your job as a cultural entity to
reintroduce and
manage that experience and show people why what they're looking at is interesting, important, or valid.
Yeah.
So go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, you've got to be careful when you've got a huge corporation with all of these different groups trying to manage themselves, when you really need a leadership group that can organize that and make sure that the communication is flowing and that information is shared. Yeah. So we used to talk about it at Imagineering as cross-pollination. We do it on our own, where we walk into someone's office and start chatting and find out what was going on, and that's how you could solve problems, is you knew people's backgrounds, their strengths and weaknesses.
Well, and you remember Peggy Van Pelt, don't you?
Absolutely, yes.
That was another thing that I think WDI really benefited from. There was a role that Peggy Van Pelt had, which was essentially artist development and retention.
Yes.
And her job was what Matt was saying. Her job was to look at Matt McKim and say, we're not using him to his strength, or, you know, this person is bored because we're not giving them enough, or,
Yeah.
and she used to do things. I remember she did an analysis of, she did this sort of weird, it's almost like a Myers-Briggs test in a way, but it
Yes.
was basically what your temperament dictated would give you the greatest strength in terms of the projects that you did.
Yeah.
And, you know, basically there are people who are very linear, who can manage stuff. You put them in the chair and they can manage the heck out of all of this stuff. There are other people, and this is where I landed, who are spirals. I
Huh.
love projects that have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Now, they can be on a continuity. You know, those projects can be for the same department, in the same company, whatever. But really, I thrive when there is sort of a again, a beginning, a middle, and an end. And then you get to start over again.
Yeah.
So that was something that Peggy did, but that was something, it's like you said, cross-pollination too. Peggy very often would say, hey, Matt, you really need to meet Joe Jones over here because, and that was a big job.
Oh,
And
yeah.
but it was almost kind of second nature to the culture of Imagineering at the time.
At that time,
That was
yes.
what you wanted to do.
And the Wednesday breakfast meetings we used to have, you know,
Wednesday breakfast meets.
bringing people in, and they would, and it would be, I remember, I don't, this one just popped in my head, but I remember, I think it was Craig Wilson had brought a friend of his in, and he was a magician. Do you remember
Yeah.
this one?
Yes.
And so this magician is doing card tricks and all kinds of things, right? So after his performance, Craig says, now remember, this is a room full of Imagineers too, right? From all aspects of the company. And he says, I just want to point something out about my friend here. He's legally blind. And the
Oh my
room
God.
just went silent. And we're going back in our minds. Wait a second. How did he do that trick? You know, he's
Everything
dealing with,
he did.
he's doing with cards. He's doing with, you know, whatever. And it was amazing for us to focus on what we perceived and then what reality was. And he could actually weigh the cards and know how many cards were in his hand.
Really?
He was blind, but he was able to adjust for his blindness to be able to be a magician. And it's just, that's just one of these breakfast meetings that we would have. Sometimes it would be internal, that people are sharing their projects with people. But
Yeah.
do you remember one? I
amazing.
remember one Wednesday breakfast meeting that was the first large sort of overview concept of what Pleasure Island at Florida could be.
Uh-huh.
And they had set up a big section of the model shop and draped it all off like a black box theater. And it was like watching one of those old industrial shows that you've seen, you know, films from the 60s, where DuPont shows you their, you know, product lineup for the next fiscal year or whatever.
Right.
It was unbelievable. And this was just for this internal presentation to get Imagineers intrigued, excited, involved in the conversation, maybe bringing assets or ideas to the table.
Sure.
It was still then, I feel like it was still a great deal of the embodiment of what Walt wanted when he started WED, which is he really wanted Hyperion back.
Mm.
He wanted a corridor culture. He wanted the cross-pollination. He wanted people to drift in and out of each other's spaces and say, what are you working on, Matt? Well, tell me about that, you know.
Sure.
And who are you talking to? And when he built his fantastic purpose-built studio in Burbank, it lost, and of course, as he got hugely successful, it became much more of a rigid and hierarchical system. And I think he missed that creativity. And I think we still had that corridor culture back then in a very explicit way.
Yeah.
I mean, and there were not key cards, and you didn't get locked out because you weren't on this project or that project.
Right.
Which
right. That did come later.
To me is the height of ridiculousness, because why?
Right. Yeah. exactly.
And then,
We're
of
all one
course,
family here.
well, and what you find out too is Matt's over there on his side working on this thing, and Jeff's over on the other side behind two key carded doors working on the same thing
Yes.
conceptually, and they don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you get a lot of
Weird things would happen.
yeah.
So,
You know,
so the
I'm sorry.
50s and
Go ahead, Ben.
60s, no, the 50s and 60s, everybody was drifting in and out of everybody's departments. I heard of everybody going in and checking on other people and seeing what they were doing. Bob Gurr talked about it. Herbie did it. Your dad did it, you said.
Yes.
So
Yes.
all this, why did it change? Why was everything placed under lock and key and key cards and things like that? Why didn't they want everybody learning from each other?
I wish that I had enough knowledge to actually have an opinion about that. But
Well,
somebody somewhere decided that that's the way these sort of creative skunk works operate. And I couldn't tell you what the logic is behind that, or if it had to, once again, I think, does it have to do with some kind of IP security? Well, everybody's under NDAs and huge. I mean, not just simple single page NDAs. They're under "you'll never work in this town again" kind of NDAs. So it's
Yeah.
not beneficial for anyone to go and sort of leak it out to the internet that, this and that is happening. So I'm not really clear on where the institutional logic came for that.
I think our competition was changing a bit too, with
Oh,
Universal
yeah.
moving up the ladder and such. So,
Well, and I think you're right about that. And I think there's also cross-pollination, because I know
yes,
that you had a lot of, people who would come in on a project contract and then they'd go back out.
yes,
And no matter what kind of NDA you sign, there's still something in your brain that says, well, we can apply that idea to
yes.
our IP and so on. So that makes a lot of sense. See,
But
Matt,
still,
I lived back in the 70s in my head.
well, I bet okay. So I'm going to throw something out at you, and you can chime in here. You were talking about my dad moving around and such, and he started on the studio lot, and then moved over to Imagineering, and of course now they're separate. But Walt knew exactly what everyone was doing, who the players all were, what their strengths and weaknesses, what they were doing. And he knew if you could drop something and move over. For instance, my dad working on, let's say, something at Disneyland, and all of a sudden the Gnome-mobile comes up, and they ended up, my dad was coming up the stairs, I think, and Walt was coming down the stairs. And Walt said to my dad, he says, "Hey, we're working on a new picture here about gnomes." And he says, "I'm going to pull you back to the studio lot, and I want you working on this. You're going to be a key person to help us with some of the gags, the continuity, the storyboarding, and everything else." And but he also knew what he was working on. So it was like, okay, that's on hold. Come over and work on this. Priority one now. So now let's fast forward. For me, I came from the model shop, as you mentioned, and then I had moved into production design. So, I'm doing rock work, and then I moved into character facades. When things would get slow and there wasn't work for me for character facades, let's say, I'd move back to the model shop because their process was starting up for the new project. I had already worked on facades, and they're done. So anyways, that's all good. But I remember talking to Tony Baxter one day, and I said, "You know what? I would love to do what my dad was doing, and I'd love to go over to the studio and work on a picture. Slip me in, give me a mentor, and I'll bring a little bit from Imagineering to give to this picture, and they will give me information of how pictures are made and some of those experiences. I'll bring it back to Imagineering, and I'll be a better Imagineer for it." And Tony was like, "Absolutely, I'm all for it." But I remember he said he was shot down in a lot of these corporate meetings over on the studio lot. And they said, "Absolutely not. We are not bringing people over and switching places and such." So that was squelched at that period. And this was the 90s, I'd say. Anyways, I don't know if you had experiences like that too, But I was excited for, being able to be traded off for a little bit, learn something, and come back, be a better
Let me tell you,
Imagineer.
you know what? Now you're stimulating a lot of memory, because once
Yeah.
again, that was, a lot of my Disney ethos was instilled in me by Jim Cora.
Okay.
For those of your listeners, or are they viewing us? Are they seeing this
Yes.
Oh
ancient
yeah,
face? Oh my God!
absolutely.
This is
Oh
live.
yeah, you're live. You're
Um,
good looking, Jim. Good looking, Jeff.
there is a really terrific book called "Not Just a Walk in the Park," which is a
Hmm.
memoir that I worked on with Jim Cora.
Yes.
And it sort of got lost in COVID, to be honest.
Mm,
And then
Yeah.
Jim passed away right as it was published. So it never got any momentum. But I'll
mm.
tell you, I've had people from the company say this should be a management training uh, manual.
Yes.
Wow.
But Jim grew up at Walt Disney's knee and Van Arsdale France's knee.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So Jim knew what made it all tick.
Yeah.
And I grew from Jim's ethos about what that means in terms of working at Disney. So I was perpetually leveraging the idea that what Matt was talking about, that yes, why don't we? You look at the Tom Morrises and Tony Baxters of the world who came out of parks. And when I was at WDI, we used to get, of course, all the queries from the, I'm a merchandise vendor, I'm an attraction host, and so on and so on. But I'll tell you, I would go down and teach do ROP class lectures, the regional occupational programs. And I met some young people there who were brilliant.
Really.
And it's not just the skills. And Matt, you get this. Vince, I know you get this, which is it's not just the skill sets. It's where's your heart and where's your mind as it relates to the Disney culture.
Yes.
Mhm.
And you would see these kids at Disneyland. And once again, that was their entree, that was their door in. And I always encouraged them to apply to Imagineering. Here's how you get a portfolio together. Here's what they want to look at. Or if they were into animation, because in my job, I would go to the animation recruiter and say, what are you looking at? Oh, we like to see draftsmanship. I'm trying to think if it was Marty. Marty, who said basically for somebody who wants to get, for instance, into being a show producer, just the ability to express visually, even if it's a sketch.
Mhm.
So you can show relative scales, or here's the, this is the vibe I want,
Position.
whatever it is. So there was a point though, and it tracks with what you were talking about, Matt, that was in the early mid 90s as I was at the end of my corporate job, where I was kind of scolded for having encouraged like Disneyland cast members to pursue Imagineering. And it was kind of disheartening because to me, that was the whole culture. And that's how you got people who had the right passion for all of it. But you're right. There was a certain point there in, like 94, 95, where that was, no, don't do that anymore. There's no cross-pollinate, why would you send, well, yeah, and everybody stay in your silo, as they say these days. Everyone's in a silo. So, but I ultimately too, within corporate synergy, I'd gotten to a point where I kind of wanted to do more, so I left the company, as a full-time employee in 95.
95. Mm-hmm.
And, once again, my last day of work was April 1st, 1995. And a few years later, somebody said, boy, that was the biggest April Fool's joke that you were going to leave the company. Because to be honest, ever since then, not all I've done, but a lion's share of what my career has been, has been projects and consulting and advising and creating for various Disney branded projects, kind of all over the place, but from films and documentaries to placemaking to books to,
Jeff, if you look back, Who was your biggest throughout your in that first half of your career? Who was your biggest influence? Who was the one that really just you still carry life lessons from that person today?
Jim Cora, Betsy Richmond, Marty Sklar,
Okay.
a lot of other people along the way
Yeah.
who were supportive and influential. Of course, here I am, 75 years later, still talking to Matt. We certainly made a connection. You make a lot of good friendships that just don't go away because you're connected. But I still, I'm in touch with Don Carson and Chris Runco. I just ran into Craig Fleming. Do you remember Craig? He was the head of show writing for Disneyland Paris. I ran into him at Chapman University
Oh,
a
wow.
couple of weeks ago. I was doing a lecture down there, and he was there
Hilbert?
sitting in at the university. He's in. I was lecturing. I lecture for a professor there named Brian Alters, who is an amazing PhD genius in science and evolution.
Huh.
And he has a course that's called From Darwin to Disney.
That's
and I continue after speaking at his class for 8 years or so, a couple of times a year. He's still going to explain it to me where I understand what the class is about. But he's also Brian Alters is also a very big aficionado. He's not, a FOMer or a fanboy. He thinks about Walt Disney both as a consumer, because he's a Disney fan, but he's also extraordinarily scientific about trying to understand. A big part of his teaching is about the evolutionary nature of happiness and about creativity and evolution. I think he'll tell me later on how wrong I got this, but and I saw Tony. I was at Richard Sherman's memorial at his funeral, and I ran into Tony Baxter was there, and we got to talking about the whole Paris project. And I said the gratitude I had to Tony was that he allowed people like Matt and I to have a real voice.
Yeah.
Now, it wasn't cursory or let the kids come in and play while the grown-ups go out of the room. He said I chose people for the team based on that's what you need. Tony's like, don't think that I was being overly flattering. I really wanted that. I wanted what you brought to the table. So I think that was the case and did you ever see on Disneyland Paris? There was a more passionate core group of those show producers were, to me, bar none, with Tim Delaney and Tom Morris and Chris Teets and Jeff Burke and Eddie Sato. Geez, what a powerhouse.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's no wonder. I still think it's the best Magic Kingdom that's been done.
It is the most gorgeous one that I think beautiful. That we've ever done. Yes. Yeah. There are jewels everywhere.
Yeah.
And it was also something kind of going back to what you were saying and what Tony was saying. It was what I think was the last project at Imagineering, and there were good ones after, but the last one that you really felt that we were a family. We worked hard, but we also played hard, and we got to know each other. And there was time to cross-pollination, to have that and to see what everyone else was working on and how it related to your project, what you were specifically working on. And I think after that project, we jumped through hoops to get that project done. We worked very hard to get it done. And I think corporately speaking, they saw what we could do. And all of a sudden, to me, this was my perception, that the schedules all started changing on project after that. And they expected us to jump through hoops and to pull it out of the hat every single time. And you can do that, but not from the start of a project to the end of a project. You wear people out.
Yeah.
And EDL, Euro Disneyland Paris, like I said, we played hard, but we worked hard. But because of that balance, there was so much creativity and love and dedication that went into that park. And I think that's why it's so beautiful and successful.
You had more free reign, it seemed like, over there. You
We
guys
did.
I would only add two things.
Yes.
Just to latch onto one thought. And this is the problem. When you pull out all the stops and you accomplish a miracle, then it becomes the bar of expectation.
Yes.
Yes.
Instead of them saying, let's not ever do that to our teams again. They say, oh, look, when the heat's on, they can do it. Let's just move the bar.
Yeah.
The other part, and I can't remember, it sounds to me like a Tom Morris thought. So I'll give Tom Morris credit for having planted it. He said, if you look at the way the project was structured, where you had Herbie Ryman doing concept stuff and Frank Armitage doing the castle painting and so on, you looked at the people who were involved from the Imagineering side, it was a cross-generational project team. So not only did you have the strength of that, but I believe it was Tom, he said, it's the first park designed by people who grew up on the park.
Oh, that's interesting.
So,
never thought about it that way.
I hadn't either until he said it, but it was, Herb Ryman didn't grow up going to Disneyland.
No.
Nor did Claude or Frank Armitage or Marty,
Rolly,
right.
Right. So that to me was interesting. And I think that's part of what Tony Baxter was looking for was, I want the passion of the kid whose creative nutrition came from Disneyland.
Yes.
And that's the other side of what you were just talking about.
So I want to go back to one thing here, Vince, before you throw another question out.
Yeah.
So actually the first time we met was actually at Fred McMurray's Disney Legends Award. We won't give specifics.
You were there with Pluto, weren't you?
Yes, I was. I was. Very close friend, helping out in every way. But let me just say, though, I was working for Disneyland at that time. Okay? You were working for the company up in Burbank. Okay, so out of high school, I started at Disneyland, and I worked in merchandise, and then I went into entertainment. So what I was doing, knowing where I was headed, I was hoping to end up at WDI. So I went to the park. I didn't go to the studio. My brother went to the studio, after high school, going through college. But I went to the park. So, okay, now we fast forward. And I'm working on a model for in Fantasyland. It was the Snow White shop. I don't know the specific name right now, but it was the Snow White shop. And I remember working with Lenny Tamura in interiors. And there were a couple other people that I was working with on this. And I remember laying out the counter and everything in there. And I remember asking the question, so where's the little closet where the broom and the dustpan and all that, wiping things down and everything, where is that? And they looked at me and they said, excuse me? We don't need a closet there for a broom. I mean, people come in and clean this at night. I said, yes, but there are people that come in and drop a box of popcorn or they spill something. And the people working in the shop in merchandise have to go and clean it up because we have to clean it up now. We can't wait to make a phone call and have someone come in to clean it. And I could see them thinking about this. And I said, okay, you've got hats. You're going to be writing on hats, and you've got this low shelf here, and kids are going to stand on this because they want to see what's going on and everything. Is that a safety issue and everything else? And all of a sudden, I just saw these people in interiors, and I wasn't interiors. I was in the model shop, building the model and sculpting things out and everything else. But here's the thing, cross-pollination. And if I hadn't have worked down at the park, I wouldn't have had these thoughts and these experiences that I brought in as a model maker.
Yeah.
So it's all important.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that's another thing, what relates back to the previous conversation, which is you do not see that kind of ascent on a regular and ongoing basis within Disney. You have a lot of lateral, you have a lot of people coming in from outside the company.
Yeah.
And, some of them have great backgrounds. They have a good background, like you said, in retail design, ergonomics. They understand the things you were talking about, but not the classic sort of way it was in, Jim Cora's career or Tony Baxter's or Tom Morris, where it was a vertical ascent.
Sure.
And then you carry all that experience, observation, and knowledge with you the way that you did.
Yeah.
So, that's important to, I think, maintaining the strength of a culture like Disney's.
Yes. Yes. And especially Imagineering.
I'm going to switch up on you really quick because this is something I definitely wanted to get to. And I know time is running. You talked in the beginning about Mary Poppins, your first movie. When you got to meet and work with the Sherman Brothers, what was that? I mean, that had to have been surreal, like a dream come true, because you were friends with them, right?
Oh, for the, from I mean, almost 40 years until Richard passed away.
Yeah.
They were like fathers to me.
Wow.
We had a very long, very close familial relationship for a long time. How I met them was being a total nerd out at the studio. You know what? When you're young, you're just like too stupid to know that maybe I don't know. But of course, I knew the Sherman Brothers, and my 3 record albums of choice were Mary Poppins, Bedknobs and Broomsticks, and Tom Sawyer. And so I had all the program books that you got at the movie theater, so I knew what they looked like, right? So I was still working for Fitzpatrick, and he had an office on the studio lot, and it was before Jim Cora even hired me. And Tom Sawyer had just come out on VHS, and I had watched it, and I had not realized that Dick and Bob wrote the screenplay as well as the songs. So it was on my mind.
Yeah.
So there I'm walking in on the parking lot, Buena Vista Street, from the old sheds towards the studio, and here come these 2 guys coming out. And I looked and I went, wow, those guys look like the Sherman Brothers. Then I got closer and closer. Those guys are the Sherman Brothers. So I walked right up to them. They saw me looking at them, and they kind of were
a little scared.
I said, excuse me, aren't you the Sherman Brothers? And of course, Bob, being Bob, looked at me and said, yeah, we are. Who the hell are you? So I introduced myself and said, I'm just a big fan of your work. And I said, I admire you so much, and gave them, the usual fan patter. But then I said, and you know what? I just watched Tom Sawyer again for the first time since I was a kid. And I talked to them a little bit about that. Well, a little bit about that turned into half an hour standing in the parking lot.
Oh, wow.
And we said, we've got to go. I've got to go too. I'm late, getting back to the office. So we said, kind of see you around. About 2 weeks later, I was walking into the 1401 building at Imagineering, coming out the front door, Dick and Bob. Coincidence is God wishing to remain anonymous, is my byword.
I like that.
He put them right in front of me, and I let the opportunity go by.
Oh,
I didn't say, here's my card. I'd love to take you guys to lunch, da-da-da-da-da. So God gave me a second chance. So they came out the door, and Dick, of course, being Dick, looks and says, hey, there's our Tom Sawyer guy. So we stood, and they asked, I asked them, what are they doing? What are you doing at WDI? We're talking about a project. When was that? That would have been 86. So I don't know what they might have been talking about, 86. But, once again, Marty was always bringing them in, and the other, show producers and stuff would bring them in to talk about music for different attractions. So we wound up another half hour in front of WDI. And this time, Bob reaches in his wallet and takes out a card and says, this is the address of our studio and the phone number. Why don't you give us a call and we'll get together? Because it seems like we have a lot in common.
Wow.
And that was the beginning. So that was 86, and went on, you know, the Shermans went through an enormous period of being the old guys. It's Ashman and Menken now. These guys are just old hat, you know, old fashioned.
Yeah.
So I spent a lot of my time, particularly when I was in corporate, when I was in communications at WDI, whenever they were like doing press events, you know, remember those big press launches they used to do? Of course you do, Matt, you know. So they would need people to like just do press pool. And I said, why don't you ask the Sherman brothers if they want to come down and do press pool, put them up at a hotel, give them a VIP, you know, Wrangler and so on. So Dick and Bob would come down and do like drive time radio for Disneyland press events and talk about Small World and Tiki Room and that kind of stuff. So I kind of tried to keep floating them back into the culture as I was through Synergy and stuff. And we were wound up able to launch some projects like the Annette Funicello box CD set back in the 90s and the Sherman Brothers Songbook CD set and so on. And a lot of that was, of course, because of Randy Thornton at Walt Disney Records, who's just a freaking genius. And so it was, and then of course we wound up, they gave me a brief sort of manuscript that was called Walt's Time. And they could never sell it to a publisher because it was too nice. You know, it was about all of it. People wanted salacious, you know, Walt Disney drowned babies in his office bathtub kind of stuff. You know, they didn't want Walt was a great guy who gave us a career break that nobody else could have.
Yeah.
They didn't, you know. So we wound up working on Walt's Time as a book project in the mid 90s after I'd left the company and got that up and going and published. And then Bob's son, Jeff, and Dick's son, Greg, reached out to me at Dick's request and said, this is the guy who knows all the stuff. And that was, as I've said before, my greatest career honor of all time is getting a Sherman Brothers word, because Bob looked at me and in his inimitable delivery said, you know what you are? You're a Shermanologist. So to be dubbed the Shermanologist by Bob himself was pretty nice.
Yeah.
I wound up working on the Boys documentary as a co-producer with Greg Sherman and Jeff Sherman as the directors, and very involved in kind of just helping, you know, get material, helped to, you know, again, a lot of it is not about being terribly smart, but it's about being smart enough to know who to ask or smart enough to know where stuff is. I know where that is, you know, and I can call Jeff Miller's office and it's in stock footage somewhere and he'll help me figure that out.
There you go.
So that, you know, and that continued through, I mean, one of the greatest things, and I had forgotten about it until I did my Mary Poppins book, was I got the draft of Tom Schumacher's foreword to my Mary Poppins book. And I had completely forgotten, but Tom gave me credit like right in the first paragraph. And he said, basically, I met Richard Sherman because my friend Jeff Kurtti introduced us. And that's how it led to Mary Poppins being on stage in London and New York and all around the world and so on. So being able to do that, you know, once again, you're paying back for a childhood. And I've said this to so many of the old guys. It's like, no, this is money owed against your gifts to us.
Yeah.
This is our obligation to you.
Yeah.
And I don't think, I mean, I think Dick and Bob understood what I meant, but I don't know that they really understood. I mean, when you're a giant, do you know you're a giant?
No.
Yeah.
I mean, when you think of how many millions of people who have been influenced or touched. I was singing Hushabye Mountain. I have a very close friend who suffers from, shall we say, odd sleep patterns. And so I was talking on FaceTime with him and I sang Hushabye Mountain. And my middle son said, Papa, that's what you used to sing to me.
Oh, wow.
When I was little. So, I mean, there's my kid who's 17 now with a key memory. And, you know, the breadth of their influence, when you think about it, is staggering. It's just
sure.
So so huge
Yeah.
and continues to be. I mean, they created a body of work that just will not, it does not tire, it doesn't age, it just keeps getting passed on. So
It
Sure.
will
I,
endure.
yeah,
It will
Classic.
so
endure.
I
Classic.
feel, yeah, and I feel, once again, you ask who was influential, those guys were influential from the time I was 5,
Yeah.
with Mary Poppins, but they continued to be influential because they became more like family and we were very supportive of each other. And
Very humble men. Very
you,
humble.
you know what? That's the funniest thing.
Yeah.
Because once again, I've seen other people in their profession who get a little bit of fame and
Oh, yeah.
kind of turn into, I still remember. I still remember when I think the last time I saw Dick was right before COVID, last time I saw him in person. And his wife, Elizabeth, pointed and said, "See over there?" And I was in his library, in his study. He had a whole shelf that was just all my books.
Oh, wow.
She's like, he calls that the Jeff Kurtti section of his library.
Oh, wow.
And then
Well,
she
you have 30 books out, right? About 30 or over 30?
40, I think
Oh,
40.
40.
Oh,
43.
40. He's over
Well,
40.
and if you
Oh, sorry.
if you count the mystery editions, I call them, because suddenly I will open a package and here's a Japanese edition of The Art of Mulan,
Okay.
or
Okay.
here's a French edition of The Making of a Bug's Life. I mean, I don't know in terms of international licensing, and they're not very good at communicating with authors about that.
That's funny.
Because I don't get a dime from those foreign editions, so
He
Okay.
gets a book, but no money.
Yeah.
and I
Open
don't
hand.
mind, I don't mind. It's kind of sexy, to have
Yeah.
foreign editions. But yeah, there's been a lot. It's been, I think the nice word was prolific. Yeah.
Yes.
I've done a
Yeah.
Wait.
lot.
I wanted to read this quote because there's 2 of them.
Mm,
Most prolific nonfiction legacy author in Disney history. More
mhm.
than
Oh, wow.
40 volumes.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's impressive in itself. And I've got one more quote, and he asked me not to say, but he said, Jeff Kurtti in the lean years kept the Sherman brothers relevant until they were able to realize they were actual legends. That's that one right there. That kind of
There
was
you
like,
go.
wow, because they were legendary, but there's a period in time, like what you said, that they were pushed aside.
It
And
was
then
it was rough, and they made sport of it. I still remember one story, but this is sort of representative of what they were dealing with. Even Alan Menken tells this story about how he was in this meeting and the guy from the music department was going, yeah, we got the Sherman brothers, down the hallway, but you're the guys, you're our guys,
yeah,
They were passé.
Mm.
There was a time where they owned co-copyrights on, their work, which is, a generous and genius thing from Walt
Yes.
to them.
Yes.
yeah.
But a lot of their early work was this Annette Funicello stuff and a lot of the pop stuff that's not the famous film stuff, right?
Right.
Ringo Starr.
So they went in, Johnny Burnett and then Ringo Starr. So they went into a
Oh, there
meeting
you
with
go.
somebody in music. And he had, this is Bob's telling of the story. They went into his office and he had framed one sheets. He had Mary Poppins. He had the Jungle Book. He had, I can't remember, another, Sherman thing. He sat down and he was like, okay. And he just, the 28-year-old vice president, which is what I get to meet with anymore in my dotage, which is somebody who hasn't even Googled me before we have a meeting. I had a friend who used to say, "Oh, I just look at those people and say, you know what? I'm too old and I'm too rich to deal with this. I have the old part licked. I'm still working on the rich part." But anyway, they sat down with this music guy, and he was like, "Okay, Sherman Brothers, tell me what you've done." And Bob, being Bob
I
was
can only
very,
imagine.
very dry.
Yes.
Yeah.
He did not waste words.
Yeah.
He's the kind of guy that you would lean into when he talked because he had something to say. He wasn't chatty all the time. Guy says, Sherman's, what have you done? Bob points to, we did that, points to the poster. We did that. We did that. And along the way, we won a couple of Oscars. What have you done?
Oh, that's great. That's great.
But that second quote just makes my heart so full. The one that you read, because I felt like it was my duty and I felt like it was important, and it hurt me to see them, not only because they were such great guys,
yes,
but because I knew that the body of their work was so incredibly influential. It had been on me and to my friends and my colleagues. So how could that timeless catalog be considered passé? How could their incredibly clever and intellectual musical theater pastiche style, how could that be considered anything other than timeless?
Everyone that's passed through the door at Disneyland has heard them. Everyone.
And continues to.
Every day.
Every day.
And continues to.
Well, and you look at all of the, I mean, there are Sherman Brothers songs playing currently 24/7 all over the world.
Oh, yeah. They just don't, a lot of people just don't know the name. And the kids today, they hear the music, but it's part of this attraction. But it's the Sherman Brothers. If anybody just looks up the Google Sherman Brothers, you're going to find this body of work that's so amazing and so incredible. It's the soundtrack of our lives.
Absolutely.
It's the soundtrack of our lives, literally.
And even beyond Disney too.
Yeah.
It's not just Disney. They're well known for Disney, but it goes well beyond that.
Yeah.
Well, it goes into their pop music, it goes to their non-Disney work like Tom Sawyer and Charlotte's Web and Slipper and the Rose and
Chitty Chitty Bang Bang.
Chitty Chitty Bang Bang and Snoopy Come Home. I mean, it's just
Snoopy. Yes.
It's huge. So yeah, I'd say that is I mean, how can you top that in terms of just being a Disney fan and having a life that involved those two gentlemen being part of my personal culture in that way? I mean, it's stunning.
You were blessed. You were blessed to call them. You're blessed to call them dad. That's incredible. But well, guys, I know it's been an hour. Jeff, I know how incredibly busy you are. 3 teenage boys. So, is there any way we could convince you to maybe come back again in the future? Because there's so much more. Books,
anytime.
Disney, absolutely.
Anytime, absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you.
I would love to.
And Jeff, I put the EDL map, my dad's EDL map, behind me for you.
Yeah,
that's where we really truly became friends.
That was our bond, boy. I'll tell you. Well, you know what? And let's talk about a Disney artist who really needs that profile elevated. Matt and I have talked about this for years now. Let's get some Sam McKim love going, because that guy was not only an incredible genius artist, but he was such a nice guy.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
He was just such a good guy. So
anyway, actually 2 days from now, on the 9th, was 20 years ago that he passed away. 20 years ago.
20.
Yeah. It's amazing that so much time has gone by, but we are planning a couple of things. So I'll be talking to you.
But, all right, everybody. Jeff, thank you so much for your time. We're so grateful, and we will schedule again soon. Maddie, thank you as always. Everybody, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Vince.
We'll see you next week. Everybody have an amazing week, and thank you for joining us today. Take care. God bless. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.